Hey guys, so today I'm not in Transylvania. I'm actually in Hungary. I'm in Budapest. And one of my favorite spots in Budapest, which is the Kerepesi Cemetery, so the Kerepesi Cemetery. It has a couple different names because the names of the streets in this part of the city have changed a couple times, but I call it the Kerepesi because that's the easiest one to pronounce for me. And this is a really neat place in the city because, well, for one, it doesn't get a lot of visitors. It's always very quiet. And I think that's because it's kind of far from the city center where a lot of the tourists like to congregate. But more importantly, this is a very Hungarian place. So this cemetery is probably one of the most famous within Hungary. And almost anyone who was really somebody in the 19th or 20th century in Hungary is buried here. So a lot of the leading politicians from that era, artists, so a lot of painters, engineers who've maybe completed some of the bridges or larger engineering projects in the country, directors, even film directors, actors, almost everybody's here who was somebody in 19th or 20th century Hungary. And so, yeah, most of the visitors here are Hungarian, but usually the place is pretty quiet, which is kind of nice for our purposes because you can come here, especially on a hot day. There's lots of shade. You can come here to relax. You know, it's kind of this oasis of quiet and greenery in an otherwise very, very loud, very big, bustling city, right? So I'll kind of walk around here and I'll show you guys some of my favorite figures, their grave sites. They're all very immaculately designed. I mean, really works of art. Some I'll just stumble upon because if you just kind of walk around here, you stumble across the graves of famous people, even if you're not looking for them. And then I'll tell you guys a little bit about the history of the place because there are some mausoleums here and kind of some sections of the park that kind of speak to some of the more dramatic episodes of Hungary's history in the last 200 years. So, all right, let's check the place out. So here's another example of one of these kind of mausoleums or, you know, really ornate grave sites in the cemetery. People we don't really remember, or certainly most of us don't remember, even within Hungary. So I had to look this family up, the Kosadik family. They were apparently, this guy was a sort of architect who built especially some of the buildings on kind of the Buda side of the city, some of the more notable buildings on this side of the city. And you can tell, I mean, just from the level of detail in the construction, that this was really a very wealthy family. So not one who's maybe talked about or remembered too much today, but in the late 19th century when he would have died, would have been a very notable family within the city. Yeah. All right, so we're coming up on one of the bigger mausoleums here. And this is the Bottányi mausoleum. So there are a couple of these in Kerepesi Cemetery. These really large mausoleums, and they're usually devoted to kind of leading figures, leading politicians from the 1848 revolution, right? And Bottányi is one of these guys who, he was a politician. I think he might have served as a minister at some point during 1848 of the briefly independent Hungary. I'd have to go back and look, but yeah, he was one of the more prominent politicians of that era. And he was also one of those who was captured by the Austrians and executed. So he paid the ultimate price, and for that they erected this really beautiful monument for him. So this here is kind of an interesting part of the cemetery too, one of these areas that requires a little bit of explanation, because this part was built by the communist regime in I guess it would have been in the 1950s, or maybe the late 1940s, to commemorate the no, yeah, it would have been 1959 to commemorate the anniversary of the 1919 socialist revolution in Hungary. So there was a brief communist dictatorship in Hungary in 1919, and yeah, it's not really maintained very well these days because it's, you know, it's one of these signs of the communist past that people would rather forget. It was kind of imposed on them in a lot of ways, and they keep it here for historical purposes, but well, clearly, you look at the weeds and everything, clearly it doesn't get a lot of visitors. Right, and here we have the grave of a Banfi. This Banfi I'm not personally familiar with, although he was apparently Prime Minister of Hungary. It looks like at some point in the late 19th century, maybe. But the Banfi family, they were a Transylvanian family, right? So if you remember, one of my first videos I published on this channel was of one of the Banfi estates near Kolozsvár. And this Banfi was almost certainly, he was related to them, and he was from Kolozsvár. So yeah, even some Hungarians from kind of outside Budapest ended up being buried here too. So coming up here is one of the more notable mausoleums within Kerepesi. This is the mausoleum of Deák Ferenc. So some people will know his name. People who just visit Budapest will maybe know his name for the metro station, or the Deák Ferenc tér, which is where several of the metro lines in Budapest converge, kind of in the center of the city. But he was a Hungarian politician in the late 19th century. So during the rebellion, he served as, the rebellion of 1848, 1849, he served as, I think, a minister of justice. He occupied some ministry in that time. And then he kind of retired before the War of Independence was over, which ended up helping him out, because then he could kind of come back and take part in Hungarian political life in the 1850s, when a lot of the revolutionary leaders had to either flee the country or live in a kind of house arrest, or they couldn't participate in politics. But he came back, and was really one of the most prominent Hungarian politicians in that period, until he died, I think in 1876, somewhere around then. So a really, really important figure in the history of Hungarian democracy, especially. And yeah, they honored him, I guess, very appropriately with this really big and quite beautiful mausoleum here. And so this right here is actually kind of a controversial area of the cemetery. I'll zoom in here and you can maybe see why. There are a lot of, these are names of soldiers, basically Soviet soldiers who died during the 1956 revolution. So the soldiers here who were sent to put down the Hungarian Revolution, the Soviet soldiers who were killed, were buried here. And it's actually one of kind of few signs of Soviet occupation you can still see in Budapest. So they removed a lot of signs of Soviet occupation. They changed the names, they took down the statues. But this is one of the, this is one element that does remain. Probably because it would be pretty controversial, be diplomatically pretty sensitive to try to remove these graves. So they're probably going to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. All right, so this section of the cemetery is a special place. That's because if you look at the tombstones, you'll see that a lot of them, they all end in 1956, right? So yeah, this one's also 1956, you can't really see. And that's because this is a special plot of the cemetery devoted to the people who died in the Budapest uprising in 1956. So yeah, it's a special place. Again, you have some of the Soviet soldiers who actually put down the uprising. You have them buried in a separate section of the cemetery, but here you have the Hungarians who fought in the revolution. Here they're buried. And you know, if you look at a lot of the dates here, you notice that they were really pretty young. So this guy would have been 35, and then I guess he has some relatives buried here with him. But yeah, a lot of them are, you know, in their 30s, or a lot of them in their 20s. So you know, really a special place definitely. And then they've erected a kind of monument here. Got the two Hungarian flags for the people who died in the uprising. All right, so over here we have a little monument to Munkácsy Mihály. I think I talked about him in the video I did for the Kultúrpálota in Marosvásárhely. So Munkácsy was a really well-known Hungarian painter in the late 19th century. Probably, in terms of painters from Hungary who made it outside of Hungary and became well-known outside of Hungary, probably one of the most successful. So he did these really kind of epic like landscape paintings and historical paintings. If you visit some of the kind of natural history museum, for instance in Vienna, you'll see he like won a big commission to kind of paint the ceiling of that building. So it's a really important figure from that era. A guy like even more though, who's buried not far from here, just across the way obviously, is Ferenc Károly. Ferenc was one of these painters in the late 19th century. He was he kind of started the Nagybanya artist colony, which was it's in Romania nowadays. It's in Transylvania, but this was a kind of school of Hungarian painters that they did a lot of really cool work in the late 19th century and early 1900s. So yeah, we got a nice little painter section over here in the cemetery.